Alice Thompson had perfected the art of being unremarkable in the small coastal town of Millhaven. At 45, she moved through her days with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred shadows to spotlights. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held a steadiness that most people attributed to a calm personality rather than years of scanning horizons for storms. Every morning at 7, Alice walked the same route to the Millhaven Community Center, where she taught swimming lessons to adults who had never learned. The municipal pool was modest, but well maintained, with large windows that let in the morning light. Her students were mostly older residents who had grown up inland before moving to this coastal town, plus a few younger adults who had somehow missed learning this essential skill. "Remember to breathe naturally," Alice would say, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone who had taught the same lesson hundreds of times. "The water won't hurt you if you respect it." What her students didn't know was that Alice Thompson had once commanded a 200-foot cargo vessel through some of the world's most dangerous waters. Captain Alice Thompson had been one of the youngest ship captains in the Merchant Marine, respected by crews twice her age and trusted by shipping companies to deliver valuable cargo safely across oceans. That was before the storm that changed everything. For 8 years now, Alice had lived quietly in Millhaven, teaching nervous adults to float and breathe underwater in the safety of a chlorinated pool. The town's residents knew her as the patient swimming instructor who never raised her voice, who could calm even the most anxious student, and who somehow always knew exactly what the weather would do. They had no idea that she once navigated through 20-foot waves in the North Atlantic, or that she had saved 17 crew members when their ship caught fire off the coast of Alaska. To them, she was just Alice the swim teacher, reliable and unremarkable. The community center where Alice worked sat at the heart of Millhaven, a town of 8,000 people nestled between rolling hills and the gray waters of the Atlantic. The building housed not just the pool, but also meeting rooms, a small gymnasium, and offices for various town services. Alice's domain was the Aquatic Center, where she spent 6 hours a day helping people overcome their fear of water. Her morning classes were usually small, 5 or 6 adults who moved through the water with careful determination. There was Margaret Sullivan, a 60-year-old retired teacher who had promised her grandchildren she would learn to swim. David Kim ran the local hardware store and had signed up after nearly drowning during a fishing trip. Sarah Williams was preparing for a vacation with her family and didn't want to be the only one sitting on the beach. Alice worked with each student individually, her hands steady as she guided them through the basic movements. She had a gift for reading people's fears and knowing exactly how much to push without overwhelming them. Her voice remained calm even when students panicked, which happened more often than the casual observer might expect. "The water will hold you up," she would remind them, "but only if you trust it." The irony wasn't lost on Alice. She spent her days teaching people to trust water, while she herself had lost that trust 8 years ago in the middle of a storm that still haunted her dreams. The memories came at unexpected moments. The sound of rain against windows, the smell of salt air, the feeling of a floor shifting beneath her feet. Each time, Alice would take a deep breath and redirect her attention to the present moment, to the student in front of her who needed guidance and encouragement. On Tuesday mornings, Alice taught the advanced class for people who had mastered the basics and wanted to improve their technique. These students were more confident, able to swim the length of the pool without stopping. They didn't know that their instructor could have taught Olympic-level technique if she wanted to, that she had once spent hours every day in the ship's gym pool, maintaining the physical fitness that had helped her survive disasters at sea. The advanced students included James Patterson, a local banker who was training for a triathlon, and Elena Vasquez, a nurse at the regional hospital who wanted to improve her endurance swimming. Alice enjoyed working with these more experienced swimmers, helping them refine their strokes and build confidence for open water swimming. The key to efficient swimming, Alice would tell them, is understanding how your body moves through the water. Force creates resistance, but flow creates speed. These technical insights came from years of observing how ships moved through various sea conditions, understanding the physics of water displacement and the importance of working with natural forces rather than against them. Alice had learned to read water like a language, understanding its moods and movements in ways that went far beyond what most swimming instructors could teach. Between classes, Alice would sit in the small office adjacent to the pool, updating lesson plans and ordering supplies. The walls were decorated with generic motivational posters about persistence and achievement, but Alice's desk held only the essentials: schedule books, emergency contact information, and a single photo of the Millhaven Harbor at sunset. Hidden in her desk drawer, wrapped in a waterproof pouch, was her captain's license. Still valid, still bearing the signature of the maritime authority that had certified her competence to command vessels in international waters. She hadn't looked at it in months, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would touch the pouch through the drawer's wood, feeling the outline of the document that represented a life she had left behind. The lunch break was Alice's favorite time of day. The pool area emptied out, leaving her alone with the gentle sound of the filtration system and the light dancing on the water's surface. She would often swim laps during this time, her stroke efficient and powerful, cutting through the water with the skill of someone who had once had to swim for her life. These solo sessions were the closest Alice came to remembering who she used to be. In the water, muscle memory took over, and for 20 minutes she was Captain Thompson again, strong and capable and unafraid. She would swim with the precise rhythm she had learned during her maritime training, each stroke a meditation on the relationship between human will and natural force. But then the afternoon classes would begin, and she would return to being just Alice, the swimming instructor who spoke softly and moved carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter the peaceful life she had constructed in Millhaven. The afternoon students included several children, part of the town's after-school program. Alice enjoyed teaching the young ones, who learned quickly and without the deep-seated fears that often plagued adult students. 10-year-old Tommy Rodriguez had been coming for 6 months and could now swim the length of the pool underwater. 8-year-old Emma Foster had overcome her terror of getting her face wet and was learning the backstroke. "Miss Alice," Emma asked one afternoon, "how did you learn to swim so good?" Alice smiled, adjusting the child's arm position. "Practice, Emma. Lots and lots of practice." It was the truth, though not the whole truth. Alice had learned to swim as a child in her family's backyard pool, but she had perfected her skills during her maritime training and refined them through years of working on ships where falling overboard could mean death. She had survived 3 emergency water evacuations during her career, experiences that had taught her the difference between recreational swimming and survival swimming. The children's questions were always innocent, but sometimes hit closer to home than Alice expected. Tommy once asked if she had ever been on a big ship, and Alice had answered honestly that she had, without elaborating. The boy had been satisfied with the simple response, but the question had triggered memories that took Alice hours to push back down. "Did you ever see whales?" Emma had asked another time. And Alice had found herself describing the pod of humpback whales she had encountered off the coast of Nova Scotia, their massive forms moving through the water with a grace that had left her entire crew speechless. She caught herself before sharing too much, but the children's enthusiasm for these glimpses into her past had surprised her. As the afternoon wore on, Alice would clean the pool area, test the water chemistry, and prepare for the next day's lessons. The routine was comforting in its predictability. No unexpected storms, no equipment failures, no life or death decisions. just the steady rhythm of teaching people to trust water one lesson at a time. The community center closed at 8, and Alice was usually the last person to leave. She would lock up the aquatic center, check the alarms, and walk home through streets that were quiet and safe. Her apartment was a 10-minute walk away, a modest two-bedroom unit above the town's only bookstore. The apartment reflected Alice's desire for simplicity. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, the walls painted in neutral colors that wouldn't draw attention. The living room held a comfortable reading chair, a small television that rarely got used, and shelves lined with books about marine biology, weather patterns, and navigation techniques. The only hint of her past life was a collection of maritime novels on her bookshelf and a nautical chart of the North Atlantic that she kept framed in her bedroom. In the second bedroom, which Alice used as a home office, she kept more substantial reminders of her former career. Maritime law textbooks, technical manuals on ship systems, and navigation equipment that she maintained out of habit rather than necessity. She told herself she kept these things for reference, but truthfully, they were anchors to an identity she wasn't ready to completely abandon. Alice's evenings followed the same pattern. She would prepare a simple dinner, read for an hour, and go to bed early. The television remained mostly unused except for checking weather reports, a habit she couldn't break despite living far from any shipping lanes. She found herself automatically noting wind patterns, barometric pressure changes, and storm tracking data, information that had once been crucial to her survival, but now served only to maintain skills she no longer used. Sleep didn't always come easily. On clear nights, Alice could hear the distant sound of waves against the harbor breakwater, and the rhythm would sometimes transport her back to the deck of a ship rolling in heavy seas. On stormy nights, the sound of rain against her windows could trigger memories of the night. Everything changed when she had made the decisions that ended her maritime career and changed the course of her life forever. But Alice had learned to manage these moments. She would get up, make tea, and sit by her window until the memories faded. She had built a life that was small but stable, contained but safe. She told herself this was enough, that finding peace was more important than pursuing greatness or recognition. The people of Millhaven had accepted Alice without question. She was helpful, but not intrusive, friendly, but not overly social. She volunteered for community events when asked, attended town meetings when important issues were being discussed, and contributed to local charities. She had become part of the fabric of the town without ever standing out, exactly as she had intended. Mayor Patricia Johnson appreciated Alice's reliability and had asked her to serve on the Emergency Preparedness Committee, a role Alice had politely declined. The fire chief, Robert Martinez, had tried to recruit her for the volunteer fire department, noting her calm demeanor and physical fitness. Alice had thanked him, but explained that her schedule at the community center made it impossible. These invitations to take on larger roles in the community were flattering, but also dangerous. Alice had learned that visibility brought scrutiny, and scrutiny could lead to questions she didn't want to answer. Better to remain helpful but unremarkable, useful but not essential. She had perfected the art of being present without being prominent, contributing without commanding attention. Dr. Janet Walsh, who ran the town's small medical clinic, had become something close to a friend over the years. She had been one of Alice's first swimming students and had continued with lessons even after mastering the basics. Their relationship had evolved into occasional coffee meetings and conversations about town events. "You know," Dr. Walsh had said during one of their coffee sessions, "you have the calmest hands I've ever seen. Have you ever considered medical work?" Alice had smiled and shaken her head. "I'm happy where I am." It was partially true. Alice was content, if not happy. She had found peace in her small role, satisfaction in helping people overcome their fears. The work was meaningful, even if it felt small compared to her previous responsibilities. Each student who learned to swim represented a small victory, a life made marginally safer and more confident. But sometimes, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, Alice wondered what would have happened if she had made different choices. If she had fought the Maritime Board's investigation instead of accepting their findings. If she had demanded a hearing instead of quietly surrendering her license and disappearing. If she had trusted that the truth would eventually emerge, instead of assuming that power would always triumph over justice. These thoughts were dangerous territory. Alice had learned to redirect them toward practical concerns. Tomorrow's lesson plans, maintenance schedules for the pool equipment, plans for the upcoming community swim meet that she helped organize each summer. The swim meet was one of Alice's favorite events, bringing together families from throughout the region for a day of friendly competition. Alice served as the head official, timing races and ensuring fair play. She enjoyed seeing her students compete, watching nervous children who had started as non-swimmers now racing across the pool with confidence. Last year's meet had drawn over 200 participants and spectators. Alice had coordinated with local businesses to provide prizes and refreshments, worked with the high school swim team to provide lifeguards, and managed the complex logistics of running dozens of races throughout the day. The event had been a resounding success, generating positive publicity for the community center and bringing people together in celebration of achievement and perseverance. Mayor Johnson had praised Alice's organization skills, noting how smoothly everything had run despite the large crowd and complicated schedule. Alice had accepted the compliments graciously, while inwardly noting that organizing a swim meet was considerably simpler than coordinating a ship's crew through a typhoon, or managing the complex logistics of international cargo delivery, or maintaining crew morale during weeks at sea. These moments of comparison between her current and former life were becoming less frequent as the years passed. Alice was healing, slowly but surely, from the trauma that had driven her from the sea to this quiet inland existence. The daily routine of teaching, the satisfaction of helping students overcome their fears, and the gentle rhythm of small-town life had created a kind of peace that Alice had never expected to find. The key was staying busy, keeping her mind occupied with immediate concerns rather than allowing it to drift toward memories of storm-tossed waters and burning ships. The swimming lessons provided structure and purpose, while the predictable rhythm of small-town life offered the stability that Alice's soul craved after years of uncertainty and danger. She had no way of knowing that this carefully constructed peace was about to be shattered by forces beyond her control. The same natural power that had once driven her from the sea was approaching Millhaven, and when it arrived, Alice Thompson would be forced to choose between the safety of anonymity and the dangerous responsibility of leadership. The storm that would test Alice's resolve was already forming in the Atlantic, though the weather services wouldn't recognize its true strength for another 48 hours. As Alice prepared for another routine day of swimming lessons, she had no idea that her quiet life was about to become extraordinarily complicated. But perhaps some part of her sensed the approaching change. That morning, as she walked to the community center, Alice found herself looking toward the harbor with unusual intensity, studying the clouds on the horizon with the practiced eye of someone who had once read weather like a language of life and death. And the water in the pool was calm and clear, reflecting the fluorescent lights in perfect symmetry. Soon, it would be filled with students learning to trust its support. Alice had no idea that within days, she would be dealing with water that was wild and dangerous, and that her quiet life as a swimming instructor was about to collide spectacularly with her hidden past as one of the most skilled ship captains of her generation. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday in Millhaven. Alice arrived at the community center at her usual time, unlocked the aquatic facility, and began her routine checks of the pool equipment. The water was crystal clear, the temperature perfect at 78 degrees, and the chemical balance exactly where it should be. Her first class wasn't scheduled until 9, which gave Alice an hour to swim laps and prepare for the day. As she changed into her swimsuit, she noticed that the morning light seemed different somehow, filtered through clouds that had a peculiar density. Alice stepped outside for a moment to check the sky, her trained eye automatically assessing wind patterns and atmospheric pressure. The weather forecast had called for partly cloudy skies with a chance of afternoon showers, nothing unusual for October in coastal Maine. But Alice's instincts, honed by years of reading ocean weather, detected something the meteorologists had missed. The air had a heaviness to it, and the wind carried a scent that spoke of distant storms. There was a quality to the light that reminded her of conditions she had encountered in the North Atlantic, just before weather systems intensified beyond all predictions. She dismissed the feeling and returned to the pool. Her first student was already waiting in the lobby, Margaret Sullivan clutching her swimming bag with nervous determination. "Good morning, Margaret," Alice said, her voice carrying its usual calm reassurance. "Ready for another lesson?" Margaret had been working on her freestyle stroke for 3 weeks, gradually building confidence in deeper water. She was one of Alice's most dedicated students, arriving early for every lesson and practicing the breathing exercises Alice had taught her. "I think I'm getting better," Margaret said as they entered the pool area. "My granddaughter said my stroke looked more natural last week." Alice smiled. "Let's see what you can do today." The lesson proceeded normally, with Margaret successfully swimming 25 meters without stopping. Alice guided her through corrections to her arm position and breathing rhythm, offering encouragement while maintaining the technical focus that made her such an effective instructor. "You're developing real confidence in the water," Alice observed as Margaret completed another length. "Remember to trust your body's natural buoyancy." Alice noticed that Margaret's improvement wasn't just technical. There was a psychological transformation happening as well. The older woman who had once gripped the pool edge with white knuckles was now moving through the water with increasing grace and confidence. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough that made Alice's work worthwhile, the moment when fear transformed into trust. As the morning progressed, Alice's other regular students arrived for their respective lessons. David Kim worked on his breaststroke technique, while Sarah Williams practiced floating and treading water. Each lesson followed Alice's carefully structured progression, building skills gradually while ensuring safety remained the top priority. David, who owned the local hardware store, had initially been one of Alice's most challenging students. A man accustomed to fixing problems with tools and determination, he had struggled with the need to relax and trust the water's support. But Alice had worked patiently with him, helping him understand that swimming was less about muscular effort and more about working harmoniously with natural forces. "It's like reading the grain in wood," Alice had told him during an early lesson. "You can fight against it, or you can work with it. The water wants to support you, you just have to let it." But throughout the morning, Alice found herself glancing toward the windows, monitoring the changing light and the increasing intensity of the wind outside. By 11 o'clock, the trees around the community center were swaying noticeably, and the first drops of rain began spattering against the glass. Alice's weather sense, developed through years of maritime experience, was screaming warnings that the official forecasts weren't reflecting. She had learned to trust these instincts, understanding that sometimes the most dangerous storms were the ones that developed faster than prediction models could track. During her lunch break, Alice stepped outside to better assess the weather conditions. The rain was light but steady, and the wind had picked up considerably. More concerning was the rapidity with which the conditions were deteriorating. Alice had seen storms develop with this kind of speed before, and they rarely remained moderate. She returned to the pool area and called the National Weather Service office in Portland, identifying herself as a community center employee, checking on local conditions. "We're monitoring a low-pressure system moving in from the Atlantic," the meteorologist told her. "Current forecasts show 2 to 3 inches of rain over the next 12 hours, with winds increasing to 25 miles per hour." Alice thanked him and hung up, but her concern wasn't alleviated. The official forecast might be accurate for normal circumstances, but Alice had learned to read the subtle signs that computers and models sometimes missed. The storm approaching Millhaven was stronger than the Weather Service realized, and it was moving faster than anticipated. Her afternoon classes proceeded as scheduled, though Alice noticed that several students seemed distracted by the increasingly dramatic weather outside. The rain was now coming down hard enough to drum against the windows, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the darkening sky. "Miss Alice," 8-year-old Emma asked during the children's class, "is the storm going to hurt anybody?" Alice knelt beside the pool edge, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Storms can be scary, Emma, but people are usually safe if they stay inside and follow safety rules. The important thing is not to panic." The answer seemed to satisfy Emma, but Alice noticed that the other children were also listening intently. She made a mental note to end the class a few minutes early, giving parents extra time to get home safely. As a precaution, she also called several parents to suggest they might want to pick up their children earlier than usual. By 4 o'clock, the weather had deteriorated beyond anything the morning forecast had predicted. The rain was now falling in sheets, and the wind was strong enough to bend the large oak trees around the community center at dangerous angles. Alice made the decision to cancel the evening adult class and began calling students to let them know. As she worked through her contact list, Alice heard sirens in the distance. Emergency vehicles were moving through town, though she couldn't tell whether they were responding to specific incidents or simply positioning for potential problems. The sound triggered memories of other emergencies, other storms, where the difference between preparedness and catastrophe had been measured in minutes rather than hours. Mayor Johnson called at 4:30, her voice tight with concern. "Alice, we're setting up an emergency shelter at the high school. Can you secure the community center and then report to the emergency command post? We might need to evacuate some areas if the storm gets worse." Alice agreed immediately, though she noted that the mayor's request suggested the situation was more serious than the official weather warnings indicated. As she began securing the pool facility, Alice's training from her maritime career kicked in automatically. She shut down non-essential equipment, checked emergency power systems, and ensured that all exits were clear and properly marked. The community center's emergency radio was broadcasting updates from the County Emergency Management Office. What Alice heard confirmed her growing concern. Rainfall rates were exceeding predictions. Several roads were already flooding, and wind speeds were approaching dangerous levels. More troubling was the lack of coordination in the reports. It was clear that the emergency responders were being overwhelmed by rapidly changing conditions. More troubling were the reports of rising water levels in Mill Creek, the small river that ran through the center of town. Alice knew the creek's normal flow patterns from her daily walks, and she understood the geography well enough to realize that serious flooding was a real possibility. The creek's drainage basin included several steep hillsides that would channel rainwater quickly toward the town center. As she finished securing the building, Alice made a crucial decision. Instead of going directly to the high school as requested, she drove to the harbor to assess conditions there. If the storm was as strong as she suspected, the harbor area would provide the best indication of what Millhaven might be facing. What she saw at the harbor confirmed her worst fears. The normally calm water was churning with 3-foot waves, and the tide was running higher than she had ever seen it. The wooden docks were already partially submerged, and several small boats had broken free from their moorings. More concerning was the rate at which conditions were deteriorating. In the 15 minutes she watched, the water level rose another 6 inches. Alice stood on the harbor wall, rain soaking through her jacket, and watched the water levels with the trained eye of someone who understood marine conditions. The storm surge was combining with unusually high tides and the massive rainfall to create a perfect storm scenario. She calculated mentally, estimating flow rates and drainage capacity, and realized that Millhaven was facing a flood of unprecedented proportions. She pulled out her phone and called Mayor Johnson directly. "Patricia, this is Alice Thompson. I'm at the harbor and we have a serious problem developing. The water level is at least 4 feet above normal and rising fast." "How bad do you think it could get?" the mayor asked. Alice studied the harbor for another moment, calculating tide tables and storm surge potential in her head. "If this continues, we're looking at major flooding in the lower parts of town. Harbor Street, Mill Creek Road, maybe the entire downtown area." "Are you sure?" "The Weather Service says this is just a heavy rainstorm." "I'm sure," Alice said firmly. "You need to start evacuating low-lying areas immediately." Mayor Johnson was quiet for a moment. "Alice, how do you know so much about storm conditions?" It was the question Alice had been dreading, but there was no time for careful explanations. "I have experience with marine weather. Trust me on this." After ending the call, Alice remained at the harbor for another 10 minutes, watching the water continue to rise and the waves grow larger. She was witnessing the early stages of what could become a devastating flood, and she knew that Millhaven's emergency responders might not be prepared for the scale of the disaster developing. As she drove toward the high school, Alice faced a decision that would change everything. She could report to the emergency shelter as requested, offer her assistance as a swimming instructor, and hope that others would take charge of the crisis management. Or she could step forward and use the skills and knowledge that she had been hiding for 8 years. The choice was made for her when she encountered the first stranded motorist. The car was a small sedan, nearly submerged in water that had risen across Harbor Street faster than anyone had anticipated. Alice could see a figure inside, frantically trying to start an engine that had clearly been flooded. Without hesitation, she pulled over and waded into the knee-deep water. "Are you okay?" she called to the driver, a young woman who appeared to be in her 20s. "I can't get my car started," the woman replied, panic evident in her voice. "The water came up so fast." Alice assessed the situation quickly. The car was disabled, but the immediate danger was the rapidly rising water, not the vehicle itself. "We need to get you out of here," Alice said, opening the driver's door. "The water's still rising." She helped the woman out of the car and guided her to higher ground, then used her own vehicle to drive the stranded motorist to safety. But as they reached the main road, Alice could see that this was just the beginning. Other cars were stalled in flooded areas, and people were emerging from businesses and homes to find themselves cut off by rising water. Alice's radio crackled with emergency traffic. Multiple rescue calls were coming in from across town, and it was becoming clear that the emergency responders were overwhelmed by the rapidly developing situation. "This is Mayor Johnson to all emergency personnel," came the voice over the radio. "We have confirmed flooding in multiple areas. All available personnel report to the emergency command post for assignment." Alice looked at the chaos developing around her and made her choice. She turned her vehicle toward the emergency command post, but not as Alice Thompson, the swimming instructor. For the first time in 8 years, she was preparing to act as Captain Alice Thompson, the woman who had commanded ships through storms far worse than this one. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic. Alice simply straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and allowed the leadership skills that had been dormant to resurface. She had spent 8 years teaching people to trust water, but now she would need to help them survive it. The emergency command post had been hastily established in the high school gymnasium, with folding tables serving as workstations and a large map of Millhaven spread across several bulletin boards. Mayor Johnson was coordinating with Police Chief Williams and Fire Chief Martinez, while volunteers worked phones and radios to track developing situations throughout town. Alice approached the command table where the mayor was studying reports of flooded roads and stranded residents. "Patricia, I'm here to help with whatever you need." Mayor Johnson looked up, relief evident on her face. "Alice, thank God! We're getting overwhelmed with rescue calls, and I don't think our people have experience with this kind of water emergency." Alice studied the map, quickly identifying the areas most at risk based on elevation and proximity to Mill Creek. Her mind automatically began calculating water flow patterns and predicting where the flooding would be most severe. "How many boats do we have available for rescue operations?" she asked. Fire Chief Martinez answered, "3 small boats, but only 2 of our guys have any real experience with water rescues." Alice nodded, continuing to study the map. "What about evacuation shelters? Where are people supposed to go?" "Here at the high school," the mayor replied. "It's on the highest ground in town." "Good. But we need to be more aggressive about evacuating people before they get trapped." Alice pointed to several areas on the map. "These neighborhoods are going to be completely cut off within the next hour if the water keeps rising at this rate." Police Chief Williams looked at Alice with surprise. "How can you be so certain about that?" Alice met his gaze steadily. "Because I understand how water behaves in storm conditions. These streets will flood in a predictable pattern, and once they do, vehicle access will be impossible." Before anyone could ask for more explanation, a rescue call came over the radio that changed the entire dynamic of the evening. "Emergency command, this is Unit 7. We have a report of people trapped in their homes on Mill Creek Road. Water is too deep for vehicle access, and it's still rising fast." Fire Chief Martinez grabbed the radio. "Unit 7, how many people are we talking about?" "At least 6 families, Chief." "Maybe more. Some of them have small children." Alice stepped forward without hesitation. "I can help coordinate the rescue operation." Mayor Johnson looked at her with confusion. "Alice, you're a swimming instructor. This is a major emergency operation." "Patricia," Alice said quietly, "I have more experience with water emergencies than anyone else here. If you want to save those people, you need to let me help." The mayor studied Alice's face, seeing something there that she had never noticed before. "What kind of experience?" Alice took a deep breath. "I used to command ships. I've managed emergency operations in storm conditions far worse than this." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at Alice, processing this information that completely changed their understanding of the quiet swimming instructor they thought they knew. "Ships?" Police Chief Williams repeated. "What kind of ships?" "Cargo vessels, international routes. I held a master mariner's license for 12 years. Alice's voice remained calm despite the enormity of what she was revealing. "I've coordinated rescues in open ocean during hurricane-force storms." Fire Chief Martinez was the first to recover from the shock. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" "Because it didn't matter before," Alice replied simply. "Now it does." Mayor Johnson made the decision that would save lives. "Alice, what do you need?" Alice turned back to the map, her demeanor shifting as she assumed command authority for the first time in 8 years. "First, we need to establish a clear evacuation route from Mill Creek Road to higher ground. Second, we need to organize the boat crews for maximum efficiency. And third, we need to get people moving before the water gets any deeper. She began issuing instructions with the clear, precise voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life or death situations. The transformation was remarkable, as if a switch had been flipped, revealing the experienced commander who had been hidden beneath the surface of the quiet swimming instructor. Chief Martinez, I need your most experienced boat operator to work directly with me. We'll take point on the Mill Creek Road evacuations. Chief Williams, can you coordinate with your patrol units to establish traffic control? We need to keep evacuation routes clear. Patricia, we should open a second shelter site. The high school won't have enough capacity if we're evacuating multiple neighborhoods. Each instruction was given with the confidence of someone who had managed similar operations before, and the emergency responders found themselves responding automatically to Alice's authority. As the rescue operation began to take shape, Alice felt the familiar rhythm of command responsibility settling over her like a well-worn coat. For 8 years, she had avoided this feeling, fearful of the memories it might trigger. But now, faced with people in danger, she discovered that her skills and instincts remained sharp. The boat crews were organized into teams, with Alice coordinating their movements from the command post while also preparing to join the water rescues personally. As she put on a borrowed life jacket and rain gear, Mayor Johnson approached her with obvious concern. Alice, are you sure about this? We don't want to put you at risk. Alice smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the command post, she looked completely relaxed. Patricia, this is what I do. Or what I used to do. Either way, those people need help, and I'm the most qualified person here to provide it. As Alice headed toward the flooded areas of town, she was no longer the quiet swimming instructor who had taught nervous adults to float in a community center pool. She was Captain Thompson again, heading into dangerous waters to save lives, carrying with her all the skills and experience that had made her one of the most respected ship commanders of her generation. The people of Millhaven were about to discover that their unremarkable swimming instructor had been hiding extraordinary qualifications, and that sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected sources. The rescue boat cut through the flooded streets of Mill Creek Road with Alice at the helm, her movements smooth and confident despite the challenging conditions. The water was now 4 feet deep and still rising, turning familiar neighborhood streets into treacherous waterways filled with submerged obstacles and unpredictable currents. Officer Danny Rodriguez, the police department's most experienced boat operator, sat beside Alice with growing amazement. I've never seen anyone handle a boat like this in flood conditions, he said, raising his voice over the sound of the engine and rain. Alice guided the boat around a submerged stop sign, reading the water conditions with expertise that seemed almost supernatural to the younger officer. Floodwater behaves differently than normal currents, she explained. You have to watch for debris fields and understand how the water moves around obstacles. They approached the first house, where a family had been reported trapped. Alice could see faces at an upstairs window, including what appeared to be 2 small children. The water level had risen to within a foot of the first-floor windows, and the current was strong enough to make approach dangerous. How do we get close enough to reach them? Rodriguez asked. Alice studied the situation, automatically calculating approach angles and current vectors. We don't go directly to the house. We position upstream and let the current carry us into position while maintaining control. She executed the maneuver flawlessly, bringing the boat alongside the house with the precision of someone who had performed similar rescues many times before. Rodriguez watched in fascination as Alice communicated with the trapped family, organizing their evacuation with calm efficiency. We're going to take you out 2 at a time, Alice called up to the window. Children first, then adults. Move slowly and follow our instructions exactly. The rescue proceeded without incident, with Alice coordinating the loading while Rodriguez managed the boat's position. Her voice remained calm and reassuring, even as the weather conditions continued to deteriorate around them. "You've done this before," Rodriguez observed, as they headed toward the evacuation point with their first group of rescued residents. "Many times," Alice replied, her eyes constantly scanning the water ahead for hazards. Though usually not in suburban neighborhoods. They made 6 trips over the next 2 hours, evacuating 32 people from homes that had become islands in the expanding flood zone. With each rescue, Alice's confidence grew, and her instructions became more precise and authoritative. Back at the emergency command post, word of Alice's performance was spreading among the emergency responders. Reports were coming in from all the rescue teams, describing coordination and efficiency that exceeded anything they had experienced in previous emergencies. "She's running this operation like a military commander," Fire Chief Martinez reported to Mayor Johnson. "Boat positioning, timing, communication protocols, everything is textbook perfect." Mayor Johnson monitored the rescue operations with growing amazement and curiosity. "How did we not know about her background? She's been living here for 8 years." "People don't always share their whole story," Dr. Walsh observed. She had arrived at the command post to provide medical support and had been following the rescue reports with professional interest. Alice always seemed to understand things differently than other people. Now we know why. As the evening progressed, the flood continued to worsen, with water levels reaching heights that threatened additional neighborhoods. Alice coordinated the expansion of rescue operations to include Harbor Street and the area around the town center, where several businesses had people trapped on upper floors. The most challenging rescue came near midnight, when a report arrived of an elderly man trapped in his basement apartment near the creek. The building was completely surrounded by floodwater, and the man was unable to reach the upper floors due to mobility issues. "This one's too dangerous," Fire Chief Martinez said as they studied the location on the map. "The current's too strong, and we don't know the structural integrity of the building." Alice studied the report and the map coordinates. "I can get him out." "Alice, that building might collapse. We can't risk losing you and a boat crew." Alice met the fire chief's gaze with steady determination. "That man will die if we don't try. I've operated in worse conditions than this." After a brief discussion, Alice was given permission to attempt the rescue with Rodriguez and one additional crew member. As they approached the building, Alice could see that the situation was indeed extremely dangerous. The water was flowing fast enough to create visible whirlpools around the building's foundation, and debris was accumulating against the structure. "We get one chance at this," Alice told her crew. "If we can't complete the rescue on the first approach, we abort immediately." She maneuvered the boat through the debris field with surgical precision, using her knowledge of water dynamics to predict where obstacles would move in the current. The approach to the building required threading between a submerged car and a floating propane tank, a navigation challenge that would have been impossible for someone without extensive experience in dangerous water conditions. "There," Rodriguez pointed to a basement window where they could see a light moving. "He's signaling us." Alice positioned the boat with its bow against the building's foundation, holding position against the current through constant motor adjustment. "Break the window," she instructed. "We need to create an opening large enough for extraction." The rescue took 12 minutes, with Alice maintaining perfect boat position while her crew worked to extract the elderly man through the basement window. The operation required strength, coordination, and absolute trust in Alice's ability to keep the boat stable against the powerful current. When they finally pulled the man to safety, he was hypothermic and in shock, but alive. As they transported him to the medical station at the high school, Alice felt the deep satisfaction that came from using her skills to save a life. "How did you learn to do that?" the rescued man asked weakly as they reached safety. Alice smiled as she helped transfer him to Dr. Walsh's care. "I used to work on the water." By 3 in the morning, the immediate rescue phase was complete. All reported trapped residents had been evacuated to safety, and the floodwaters had begun to stabilize at their peak level. Alice stood in the command post, still wearing the borrowed rain gear, looking like she had been through a battle. Mayor Johnson approached her with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Alice, what you did tonight, how many people did you save?" Alice considered the question. "We saved 47 people directly from the flood zone, but more importantly, the evacuation procedures probably saved hundreds more who got out before they were trapped." "I mean, how did you know how to do all of this?" Alice was quiet for a moment, looking at the map where red pins marked each successful rescue. "I spent 12 years commanding cargo ships through some of the worst storms on the planet. Emergency rescues, crew evacuations, coordinating with Coast Guard operations. It was part of the job." "Why did you stop?" Dr. Walsh asked gently. The question Alice had been dreading finally came, but after the night's events, she found she was ready to answer it. "There was an accident, a storm in the North Atlantic 8 years ago. I lost crew members, and the Maritime Board decided I was responsible." She paused, choosing her words carefully. They weren't wrong about the outcome, even if they were wrong about the cause. "I decided it was time to find a different way to help people." Police Chief Williams had been listening from across the room. "So you became a swimming instructor. Teaching people to trust water seemed like a good way to balance the scales," Alice replied. "Smaller risks, but still meaningful work." As dawn broke over Millhaven, the extent of the flood damage became clear. The downtown area was devastated, with several feet of mud and debris covering most of the streets. But remarkably, there had been no fatalities and only minor injuries among the residents. Mayor Johnson called a press conference for later that morning, where she would need to explain how a town of 8,000 people had managed such an effective emergency response to an unprecedented natural disaster. "The media is going to want to know how we pulled this off," she told Alice as they surveyed the damage from the high school parking lot. "What should I tell them?" Alice considered the question. "Tell them the truth. That good emergency management depends on using all available resources and expertise, regardless of where you find them. And what about you? Are you ready for people to know about your background?" Alice looked out over the flooded town, watching early morning sunlight reflect off the water that still covered Harbor Street. For 8 years, she had hidden from her past, afraid that exposure would bring back painful memories and unwanted attention. But the night's events had shown her something important. Her skills and experience weren't burdens to be hidden. They were tools that could save lives when used properly. "I think it's time for people to know," Alice said finally. "Not because I want attention, but because emergencies like this might happen again. The town should know what resources are available." The press conference that afternoon drew media attention from across New England. Mayor Johnson's account of the rescue operations, coordinated by a former ship captain working as a swimming instructor, captured public imagination in a way that few local news stories ever did. Alice stood beside the mayor during the briefing, answering technical questions about flood response and emergency coordination with the same calm competence she had shown during the rescues themselves. "Captain Thompson," one reporter asked, "why did you give up commanding ships to teach swimming lessons?" Alice had prepared for this question. Sometimes life takes you in directions you don't expect. I found meaningful work helping people overcome their fear of water. Last night showed me that all experiences have value, even if we don't recognize it at the time. Will you consider returning to maritime work? Alice smiled. I'm exactly where I need to be. Millhaven is my home now. In the days that followed, Alice's story spread far beyond the local media. National news outlets picked up the story of the ship captain turned swimming instructor who had emerged during a crisis to save dozens of lives. The narrative appealed to people's desire for stories about hidden talents and unexpected heroes. Social media amplified the story, with hashtags like #hidden hero and #unexpected captain trending for several days. Video footage from the rescue operations taken by emergency responders and grateful residents showed Alice coordinating boat movements with professional precision while rain and wind created chaos around her. But for Alice, the most meaningful responses came from closer to home. Her swimming students, many of whom had been evacuated during the flood, began returning for lessons with a new appreciation for their instructor's expertise. I always wondered why you seemed so confident in the water, Margaret Sullivan said during her first lesson after the flood. Now I understand. Alice resumed her regular teaching schedule, but with some significant changes. The town council had asked her to develop an emergency water safety program, training local responders in flood rescue techniques. The community center would be expanding its aquatic programs to include specialized training for emergency situations. More importantly, Alice had begun to integrate her maritime experience into her regular teaching. She now included lessons on reading water conditions, understanding currents, and recognizing dangerous situations. Her students were learning not just how to swim, but how to be truly safe around water. The ocean is powerful, Alice would tell her classes, but it's not malicious. Water has rules, and if you understand those rules, you can work with it instead of fighting against it. The children's classes were particularly enthusiastic about these expanded lessons. Tommy Rodriguez, now 11, had become fascinated with maritime navigation and was learning to read tide charts and weather patterns. Emma Foster was practicing rescue swimming techniques, determined to become a lifeguard when she was older. Miss Alice, Emma asked one afternoon, do you miss being a ship captain? Alice considered the question while watching Emma practice her backstroke. I miss some parts of it, she said honestly. I miss the feeling of being completely competent at something difficult. But I've learned that there are many ways to use the same skills. The weeks following the flood brought a steady stream of visitors to Millhaven. Emergency management professionals came to study the town's response procedures. Maritime safety experts wanted to understand how ship navigation techniques had been adapted for inland flood rescue. Reporters continued to follow up on Alice's story, intrigued by the transformation from ship captain to swimming instructor to emergency coordinator. Alice handled the attention with characteristic grace, giving interviews when requested, but always redirecting focus toward the community's collective response rather than her individual contributions. She had learned years ago that leadership was about enabling others to succeed, not about personal recognition. 3 months after the flood, Alice received an unexpected phone call from the Maritime Administration in Washington. They had seen the news coverage of her role in the Millhaven rescues and were interested in discussing opportunities for her to return to maritime service. Captain Thompson, the caller said, your performance during the flood response has been noted at the highest levels. We'd like to discuss reinstating your license and offering you a position with our emergency response division. Alice listened politely to the offer, which included command of a Coast Guard cutter specializing in maritime disaster response. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she had once dreamed of, a chance to return to the career that had defined her identity for so many years. I appreciate the offer, she told the caller, but I'm not interested in returning to full-time maritime service. May I ask why? Your record shows exceptional competence, and the flood response demonstrated leadership abilities that we desperately need. Alice looked out the window of her apartment toward the harbor, where fishing boats were returning with the afternoon catch. Because I've learned that meaningful work doesn't require a big stage. I'm helping people here in ways that matter to them and to me. But Alice wasn't completely closed to new opportunities. She agreed to serve as a consultant for maritime emergency training programs, traveling occasionally to Coast Guard facilities to share her expertise with younger officers. These consulting assignments allowed Alice to use her skills on a larger scale while maintaining her primary commitment to Millhaven and her students. She found satisfaction in knowing that her experience was helping train the next generation of maritime emergency responders. During one particularly memorable consultation at the Coast Guard Academy, Alice worked with cadets who were learning emergency response procedures. She taught them how to adapt maritime navigation techniques for inland rescue operations, sharing insights that could only come from someone who had successfully bridged both environments. The principles are the same whether you're rescuing crew members from a sinking ship or evacuating families from flooded homes, Alice told the cadets. You read the conditions, calculate your resources, and execute with precision. But most importantly, you never leave anyone behind. The town of Millhaven rebuilt quickly from the flood, with improved drainage systems and updated emergency procedures that reflected the lessons learned during the crisis. Alice played a key role in developing the new emergency protocols, ensuring that future responses would be even more effective. The rebuilt downtown area included a new emergency operations center, equipped with advanced communication systems and flood monitoring equipment. Alice consulted on the design, incorporating features that would enable better coordination between different types of emergency responders. Mayor Johnson, running for re-election on a platform that emphasized emergency preparedness, often spoke about the importance of recognizing hidden talents within the community. We had a world-class emergency coordinator living among us for 8 years, she would tell audiences. The lesson is that expertise comes in many forms, and we should never assume we know everything about our neighbors' capabilities. Alice appreciated the recognition, but remained focused on her daily work with students. She had learned that heroism wasn't about dramatic gestures or public acclaim. It was about using your abilities to help others when they needed it most. 1 year after the flood, the town held a memorial service for the crisis response, honoring all the emergency personnel and volunteers who had helped during the disaster. Alice was asked to speak about the lessons learned from the experience. A year ago, many of you learned things about me that I had kept private, she told the gathering. But I also learned things about this community that amazed me. I saw neighbors helping neighbors, strangers risking their own safety to help people they'd never met, and ordinary citizens rising to extraordinary challenges. She paused, looking out over the faces of people she had come to know as friends and neighbors, rather than just students or acquaintances. The real lesson isn't about my background or qualifications. It's about the fact that every community has hidden strengths and untapped resources. The key is creating an environment where people feel safe to share their abilities when they're needed most. Alice concluded her remarks by announcing the establishment of a community skills registry, where residents could voluntarily list special training or experience that might be useful during emergencies. We never know when we might need a certified electrician, a trained medic, or someone with specialized knowledge, she explained. By sharing information about our capabilities, we make the whole community stronger and more resilient. The Skills Registry became a model that was adopted by other communities throughout Maine and New England. Alice received requests to speak at emergency management conferences. sharing her insights about community-based disaster response. During this time, Alice also began working with other communities that had experienced flooding or were at risk for similar disasters. She developed a comprehensive training program that could be adapted to different geographic and demographic circumstances, sharing her knowledge of how to coordinate civilian and professional emergency responders effectively. The program, which she called Community Water Emergency Response, was adopted by emergency management agencies in 12 states. Alice found herself traveling to coastal communities, river towns, and areas prone to flash flooding, training local officials and volunteers in the techniques she had developed during the Millhaven crisis. The key principle, Alice would tell her trainees, is that everyone in the community has something to contribute during an emergency. The challenge is identifying those contributions ahead of time and creating systems that can deploy them effectively when needed. These training sessions also gave Alice the opportunity to work with professional emergency responders from various backgrounds. She enjoyed collaborating with fire chiefs, police commanders, and Coast Guard officers, sharing insights that bridged the gap between maritime emergency management and inland flood response. One particularly memorable training session took place in a small Louisiana town that had been devastated by hurricane flooding 2 years earlier. The local emergency manager, a woman named Carol Broussard, had specifically requested Alice's help after reading about the Millhaven response. "We had all the official procedures in place," Broussard explained as they toured the rebuilt downtown area. "But when the water started rising faster than anyone expected, we didn't have the flexibility to adapt our response in real time." Alice spent 3 days working with Broussard's team, helping them develop more adaptive emergency protocols and training local volunteers in basic water rescue techniques. The experience reminded her of how much satisfaction she derived from sharing knowledge that could save lives. But perhaps the most significant development in Alice's post-flood life was the deepening of her relationships within the Millhaven community. No longer the mysterious swimming instructor who kept to herself, Alice had become a trusted advisor and friend to many of the people she had once known only as casual acquaintances. Her friendship with Dr. Walsh had evolved into a close partnership on community health and safety initiatives. They collaborated on programs that combined medical emergency preparedness with water safety training, creating comprehensive approaches to disaster response that addressed both immediate rescue needs and longer-term health concerns. "You've become the person I always suspected you were," Dr. Walsh told Alice one evening as they walked along the harbor after a community planning meeting. "Competent, caring, and completely committed to helping others." Alice appreciated the observation, but she had come to understand that her transformation wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about integrating all the aspects of her identity, past and present, professional and personal, into a coherent whole. The revelation of Alice's maritime background had also changed the dynamics of her teaching. Students now approached her lessons with a different level of respect and curiosity, understanding that they were learning from someone with extraordinary expertise. But Alice was careful not to let her newfound recognition overshadow the fundamental purpose of her work. Her teaching remained focused on helping people overcome their fears and develop confidence in the water, regardless of their swimming goals or abilities. "Every person who learns to swim is a victory," Alice would tell visitors who came to observe her classes. Whether they become competitive swimmers or just want to feel safe around water, the transformation from fear to confidence is always meaningful. The annual community swim meet had grown into a regional event, drawing participants from towns throughout coastal Maine. Alice's role as head organizer had evolved into something resembling a small festival with water safety demonstrations, emergency response exhibits, and educational programs alongside the competitive swimming events. The 2024 swim meet, held on the fourth anniversary of the flood, included a special ceremony honoring all the emergency responders and volunteers who had participated in the rescue operations. Alice was asked to present awards to the boat crews, emergency coordinators, and civilian volunteers who had made the successful response possible. 4 years ago, this community faced its greatest challenge, Alice said, as she addressed the crowd gathered around the pool. What we learned that night wasn't just about emergency response or flood management. We learned about the strength that emerges when people work together toward a common goal. She presented awards to Officer Rodriguez, who had become one of the region's most skilled water rescue specialists, to Fire Chief Martinez, who had implemented new emergency protocols throughout the county, and to dozens of volunteers who had opened their homes, provided transportation, and supported the rescue operations in countless ways. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for the one casualty of the flood, an elderly man named Harold Peterson, who had died of a heart attack during the evacuation, not from the flooding itself, but from the stress of the emergency. His family had established a scholarship fund for emergency management training, continuing his legacy of community service. As the swim meet wound down and families began packing up their gear, Alice found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that stormy October evening. She was still teaching swimming lessons, still helping people overcome their fears and develop confidence in the water. But she was doing so with a fuller understanding of her own capabilities and a deeper appreciation for the ways that individual skills could serve collective needs. The most meaningful recognition continued to come from her daily interactions with students and community members. People who had been rescued during the flood would stop her on the street to express their gratitude. Students would share stories about how their swimming skills had given them confidence in other areas of their lives. "You saved my life," Mrs. Patterson told Alice during a chance encounter at the grocery store. Mrs. Patterson had been one of the residents evacuated from Mill Creek Road during the flood. "We all saved each other that night," Alice replied. "I just had some experience with boats." As Alice approached her 50th birthday, she reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. The quiet swimming instructor who had hidden her maritime past had become a respected community leader and emergency response expert. But more importantly, she had found a way to integrate all aspects of her identity into a coherent, purposeful life. The pool at the community center remained her primary domain, but it was no longer a refuge from her past. It was a platform for sharing the full range of her knowledge and experience. Alice had learned that authenticity wasn't about revealing everything to everyone, but about being true to yourself while serving others effectively. On calm evenings, Alice would sometimes walk down to the harbor where her journey in Millhaven had begun. She would watch the boats returning from their day's work, noting the weather conditions and the state of the tide with the automatic assessment of someone whose life had been shaped by understanding marine environments. But she no longer felt the pain of separation from that world. Instead, she felt the satisfaction of someone who had found a way to honor her past while building a meaningful future. The water in the harbor reflected the lights of the town, creating patterns that shifted with the gentle movement of the waves. Alice watched these patterns with appreciation rather than longing, understanding finally that her relationship with water had evolved rather than ended. She had spent her career teaching people to trust water, first as a ship captain ensuring her crew's safety in dangerous seas, and later as a swimming instructor helping nervous adults overcome their fears in the controlled environment of a community pool. Both roles required the same fundamental skills: technical competence, calm leadership, and the ability to help others feel confident in challenging situations. Alice had learned that these skills transferred across environments and circumstances, making her uniquely qualified for whatever challenges might arise. 5 years after the flood, Alice received an invitation that brought her story full circle. The International Maritime Organization was hosting a conference on emergency response coordination, and they wanted her to deliver the keynote address about bridging maritime and civilian emergency management. Standing before an audience of maritime professionals, emergency management experts, and government officials from around the world, Alice reflected on the journey that had brought her from the deck of a cargo ship to a community center swimming pool, and finally to this moment of sharing her hard-earned wisdom. Emergency response isn't about the size of your command or the sophistication of your equipment, she told the audience. It's about understanding that every person has something to contribute, and that the most effective responses emerge when we create systems that can recognize and deploy those contributions effectively. She spoke about the importance of maintaining skills even when they're not actively used, about the value of community-based emergency preparedness, and about the ways that individual expertise could serve collective needs during times of crisis. The captain who becomes a swimming instructor isn't abandoning her skills, Alice concluded. She's finding new ways to use them, and when the storm comes, those skills are still there, ready to serve when they're needed most. The speech was well received, but more importantly, it represented Alice's complete integration of her past and present identities. She was no longer hiding from her maritime career or feeling diminished by her current role as a swimming instructor. As Alice walked back toward her apartment, she felt the deep satisfaction that comes from living authentically. She was no longer Captain Thompson, the ship commander, or Alice, the swimming instructor. She was simply Alice Thompson, a person whose varied experiences had prepared her to serve her community in ways that mattered. The story of the ship captain who became a swimming instructor and emerged during a crisis to save her community had become local legend. But for Alice, it was simply the story of learning to use all of her abilities in service of others. The pool would be waiting tomorrow, calm and clear, ready for new students to discover that they were stronger and more capable than they had imagined. And Alice would be there to guide them, carrying with her the wisdom of storms weathered and the peace of finding her true harbor in the most unexpected place. The transformation was complete, but the work continued, one student at a time, one lesson at a time, one life made better through the patient application of knowledge earned through experience and shared with love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Alice's journey reminds us that our past experiences, even painful ones, can become tools for helping others when we're ready to embrace them fully. Sometimes the greatest heroes are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when their unique combination of skills and compassion is needed most.